My name is Michael Carter. I'm 46 years old, and not long ago I learned that respect is not something you negotiate. It's something you enforce. Everything I built over 15 years collapsed into a single afternoon of fury and contempt. There is nothing more dangerous than a man who stays silent while the people he loves try to trample his dignity. That afternoon, while my mother-in-law Patricia Whitman screamed at me across my own dining table and my wife, Ashley Carter, celebrated every insult she threw, I realized I no longer had a family. I had parasites feeding off my hard work. She called me useless. She called me a coward. And my wife, the woman I stayed up nights working for so I could give her a life of luxury, simply clapped with a complicit smile that burned through my chest. What they didn't know at that moment was that every brick in that house, every dollar in their accounts, and every privilege they enjoyed was about to disappear beneath their feet. I had already planned it. While they were yelling, I was executing the first step of their downfall. They thought they had won the battle because I didn't answer their insults, but the silence of an intelligent man is always the prelude to a storm that leaves no survivors. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For years, my life was a choreography of sacrifice and silence. I wake up every day at 5 in the morning, long before the sun even dares to rise, and I return home when most people are already resting in front of the television. I'm a consulting engineer. My job is to solve complex problems, to find cracks in structures that appear solid, and to make sure things don't collapse. Ironically, while I was busy saving other people's buildings, I failed to see the fractures forming in the foundation of my own home. Ashley and I got married when we were barely in our 20s. Back then, we were a team, or at least that's what she made me believe. She came from a family that always had grand ambitions but very little money to support them. Her mother, Patricia Whitman, was a woman of refined gestures and poisonous words. From day one, she looked at me like I was an intruder, someone who existed solely to provide the lifestyle her daughter deserved. Despite that, I respected her. I welcomed her into my house, paid for her vacations, and made sure she never lacked anything. I thought generosity would buy respect. But respect isn't bought. It's earned through boundaries. Boundaries I never set. My routine was predictable. I worked, saved, invested. I bought a country house, a luxury condo in the most exclusive part of the city, and 2 high-end vehicles. Everything was registered under a holding company I personally managed, a small technical detail they completely ignored. Ashley stopped working 10 years ago. She said office stress was too much for her, and in my obsession with being the protector, I told her not to worry. I gave her credit cards, full access to the accounts, and total freedom to manage the household. What I really did was feed a beast that over time lost all sense of reality. The atmosphere at home began to shift in subtle ways. At first it was casual remarks. Patricia started visiting every weekend and staying for weeks at a time. She would sit at the head of the table, the seat that was rightfully mine, and criticize the food, the decor, and eventually my work schedule. "A man who's never present isn't a man, he's an ATM," she would say while sipping the expensive coffee I paid for. Ashley would just laugh. At first the laughs were nervous. Over time, they became approving. I would return from exhausting business trips, dark circles under my eyes and my back aching, only to find a wife who didn't ask how I was, but how much I had billed that month. Intimacy became a privilege she granted only when I fulfilled her material demands. I felt like a stranger in my own living room. I'd sit down for dinner, and they would talk about people I didn't know, trips they wanted to take, expenses that defied all logic. I observed. I've always been a man who observes. I noticed how Ashley would leave the table to answer private messages, how Patricia would whisper in her ear, while they glanced at me from the corner of their eyes. The balance finally broke when I stopped saying yes to everything. One month, I chose to reinvest a significant amount of money into a new project and reduce the luxury budget at home. It wasn't a crisis, it was financial strategy. But to them, it was a personal offense. The mask of the perfect family began to crack. Ashley started treating me with icy contempt, and Patricia became bolder in her attacks. I was still the same man, the provider, the one holding the structure upright. But to them, my worth was directly tied to the number of zeros in the available balance. I could feel this lifestyle consuming me. I looked in the mirror and saw a 46-year-old man who had everything on paper, but nothing in his heart. My house was no longer my refuge. It was a silent battlefield where I was the only one who didn't realize the war had already begun. I believed that if I endured a little longer, if I were more patient, they would understand the value of effort. How wrong I was. A predator doesn't understand gratitude, only hunger. And they were hungry. Hungry for power, control, and a superiority that never belonged to them. I was surrounded by luxury, yet I had never felt so miserable and alone. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I got home earlier than expected because a meeting had been cancelled. When I walked in, the silence in the house felt heavy, artificial. I didn't announce myself. I headed toward the kitchen for a glass of water, and that's when I heard them. They were in the dining room, surrounded by shopping bags from designer brands I had personally paid for that very morning. Patricia, my mother-in-law, had a glass of wine in her hand, from my private reserve, and Ashley was reviewing some papers with an intensity I had never seen her use for household matters. "You need to push him harder, Ashley," Patricia said in that sharp tone that had always grated on my nerves. "That useless man doesn't notice anything. He's so obsessed with his numbers and his projects that you could empty his account right in front of him, and he'd think it was a bank error." Ashley let out a dry laugh, one I didn't recognize. "I know, Mom, but he's getting difficult with the money. He says he's investing. I need him to sign the transfer for the beach property before he becomes even more restrictive." I froze in the hallway. It wasn't just about the money. It was the total lack of respect, the planning of emotional and financial theft right under my nose. I decided to walk in. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I simply approached the table and looked at them. The silence that followed was absolute, but not from shame, from defiance. Patricia reacted first. She didn't lower her wine glass. She looked me up and down with infinite contempt. "Oh, the great engineer came home early," she said with a crooked smile. "Good. We were just talking about how little you contribute emotionally to this family. You're just another piece of furniture in this house, Michael. A piece of furniture that pays the bills, but useless all the same." The insult hit my chest, but my face remained calm. I looked at Ashley, waiting for some defense, a gesture of loyalty. Nothing. She crossed her arms and held my gaze with a coldness that confirmed love had died a long time ago, if it had ever existed. "Useless?" I asked quietly. "I built everything you see. I've supported your mother, your whims, this house, asking for nothing in return except a little peace." Ashley scoffed. "Peace? What you give us is boredom, Michael. You're a grey man. My mother is right. You don't know how to be a husband. You only know how to be a boring provider. You're good for nothing else." That's when Patricia stood up. She stepped toward me, invading my personal space, and shouted with a force that made the windows vibrate. "You are useless. A small man who thinks money equals power. In this house, we're the ones in charge, and you're nothing but the idiot who signs the checks." And then Ashley did something that shattered the last remaining bridge between us. She started clapping, slowly, rhythmically, with a smile of pure satisfaction, celebrating the humiliation her mother was delivering to me in my own dining room. I stood there, looking at the two women who had lived off my effort for a decade, mocking my existence. I felt pressure in my chest, heat rising up my neck. but I didn't explode. An intelligent man knows anger is wasted energy. My mind, trained for engineering and strategy, began detaching emotionally from them. They were no longer my wife and my mother-in-law. They were opponents on a board. "Get out," Ashley said, pointing toward the back door. "Go to your office and keep counting pennies. We don't want to have dinner with someone that pathetic." Patricia laughed again and sat back down, turning her back on me as if I were a servant no longer needed. I left the room without a word. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't try to reason. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady when I turned on the computer. They thought they had symbolically expelled me from their circle, that they had reduced me to nothing with their screams and applause. What they didn't know was that in that exact moment, I had made the decision to erase them from my life. But not in the way they expected. In the code I live by, humiliation is paid for with the total loss of privilege. I opened the account statements, the property files, the contracts. They believed the house was theirs because they slept in it. They didn't understand that I always play 3 moves ahead. That night, while I listened to them laughing downstairs and opening another bottle of wine, celebrating their victory over the useless man, I began moving the pieces. The betrayal was complete. The emotional expulsion was real. Now the demolition process had begun. For the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost inside my own home. They interpreted my silence as defeat. They believed their screams and applause had broken my spirit. They watched me come and go with my briefcase, head slightly lowered, pretending submission that fed their pride. But behind that facade of a defeated man, my mind was operating at a speed they could never comprehend. An engineer knows that if you want to bring down a structure without damaging the surrounding buildings, you need surgical precision. The first thing I did was contact Daniel Brooks. Daniel isn't just a lawyer, he's a specialist in asset protection and corporate structuring, someone I met years ago during an industrial project. We met at a discreet cafe, far from my usual routes. I placed the documents on the table and got straight to the point. I want them to end up with nothing, but I want it legal, slow, and painful. Daniel reviewed the paperwork and smiled with a coldness that mirrored my own. Since the house and vehicles were registered under a holding company that I solely controlled as managing director, and Ashley had signed a prenuptial agreement years ago, ironically at her mother's insistence to protect an inheritance that never existed, the path was clear. My plan wasn't just divorce. That would have been too easy for them. My plan was a life audit. I began by revoking the authorization on the supplementary credit cards, but I didn't cancel them outright. I reduced the limits to humiliating amounts, just enough for their cards to decline at the grocery store checkout. Then I initiated what I called structural maintenance on the house. I hired a technical demolition assessment firm to inspect the foundation, citing potential structural instability. That would give me the legal justification to vacate the property at the right moment. Every night, while they went out to dinner spending what remained in the checking account, I emptied my personal files, relocated valuable belongings, and secured my savings into international accounts Ashley didn't even know existed. Through a private investigator Daniel recommended, I discovered something even more useful. Patricia had significant gambling debt. She had been using the money I gave Ashley to cover losses at underground casinos. That was the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just ungrateful, they were financially reckless and morally bankrupt. I remained cold. When Ashley asked for extra money for a trip with her mother, I nodded and told her I'd review the budget. I let the expectation build, then cut it off with a technical excuse. I watched frustration begin to erode her patience. But the real preparation was legal. Daniel drafted a lawsuit for mismanagement of marital funds, supported by transaction records showing money diverted to Patricia's debts. We had account statements, recordings, testimony. Patience is a weapon few men possess today. Most react instantly, yelling, slamming fists on tables. Not me. I wanted to witness the exact second reality struck them. I ensured the lease for the luxury apartment we were living in was under my corporation's name, and that the contract could be terminated due to major structural renovations. Legally, they would become unauthorized occupants in less than 30 days. One detail they always forgot: I owned the infrastructure. They enjoyed the software, the polished interface of life. I controlled the hardware. One afternoon, while Patricia bragged in the living room about her social connections, I sat in my office sending the final email that activated every termination clause. There was no anger in my fingers, only the satisfaction of a perfectly executed calculation. I even began rebuilding my own support network. I reconnected with old friends Ashley had pressured me to distance myself from. I explained the situation with a calmness that unsettled them. "Michael, this is war," one of them said. "No," I replied. "This is a liquidation of defective assets." I was ready. I had the lawyer, I had the evidence, I controlled the assets, and most importantly, I had the resolve of a man who has nothing left to lose, because emotionally, he has already lost everything. The trap was set. The bait was their own arrogance. All that remained was for them to take the final step toward the abyss they had dug with their applause of contempt. The day of the climax, there were no screams from me. It was a Monday morning exactly at 10 o'clock. Ashley and Patricia were having breakfast on the terrace, enjoying the sun and, as always, planning how to spend money they no longer had. I walked down the stairs wearing my best suit, briefcase in hand, my expression completely neutral. I stopped in front of them and, for the first time in weeks, looked them directly in the eyes. "You have 2 hours to pack the essentials," I said calmly, almost monotonously. "A moving truck will be here shortly. It's not to take your things to a new place, it's to put them in storage. The lease on this house has been terminated by my company. The property is entering immediate structural renovation." Patricia let out the same sharp, contemptuous laugh from that afternoon. "What are you talking about, you useless man? This is my daughter's house. You can't throw us out." "Mom's right, Michael," Ashley added, slamming her cup down. "Stop embarrassing yourself. This house is part of our marriage." I pulled a blue envelope from my briefcase and placed it on the table, right on top of the toast. "The house is owned by a corporation of which I am the sole managing director. Legally, you have overstayed your welcome. Here is the court-approved eviction notice due to structural risk. And Ashley," I paused, savoring the moment, "here is your divorce filing. It's based on fraudulent use of marital assets to cover your mother's gambling debts. All your credit cards were cancelled 10 minutes ago." Ashley's face shifted from furious red to ghostly pale as she desperately tried to open her banking app. Patricia stood up, ready to scream at me again, but I raised my hand. "If you raise your voice, Patricia, the officers waiting outside for my signal will come in and escort you out in front of every neighbor. I know how much you value your reputation at the country club." At that exact moment, the intercom buzzed. The movers had arrived. They began walking in with cardboard boxes and packing tape. The silence that fell over them was the sweetest sound I had heard in years. Ashley started crying, not out of regret, but out of panic. She realized the grey and boring man she had despised had dismantled her world with the same precision he uses to design a bridge. "You can't do this to us," Ashley screamed. "I'm your wife." "You were my wife until the day you clapped while your mother humiliated me at my own table," I replied, colder than I expected myself to be. "That was the day you stopped being part of my life and became an unnecessary expense I've just eliminated." I watched as the movers wrapped paintings and began carrying furniture out. Patricia stood in a corner, trembling, finally understanding that her debts would now be exposed, and there would be no more checks to preserve her image of high society. Ashley begged. She tried to approach me, tried to use the emotional manipulation that had worked so well for a decade. I remained steady. I saw her for what she truly was, a stranger who had tried to parasitize my existence. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked in a broken voice. "That's not my concern," I said as I put on my sunglasses. "Maybe your mother can teach you how to live with what you actually have." Nothing. I walked toward the exit while the moving truck blocked the driveway. There was no backward glance, no hesitation. As I got into my car, I watched through the rear-view mirror as Patricia's suitcases were placed on the sidewalk. They thought I was useless because I didn't respond to their insults with noise. What they never understood is that a man who knows how to build also knows how to demolish down to the foundation when the structure is no longer safe. The useless man left with everything that truly mattered: his freedom, his assets, and above all, his dignity intact. They were left with their applause echoing inside a house that no longer belonged to them. 6 months have passed since I closed the door of that house for the last time. Sometimes people ask me if I felt remorse leaving 2 women on the street like that. My answer is always the same. I didn't leave them on the street. Their own actions and arrogance built the road that led them to that sidewalk. Justice isn't always a hammer that falls with noise. Sometimes it's simply removing the support that was holding up a lie. Ashley tried calling me dozens of times, first with insults, then with pleas, and finally with the kind of desperation that only comes from someone who has never had to work for anything in her life. Patricia had to face her gambling debts without my protection. They sold their jewelry, their designer bags, whatever they could salvage before reality caught up with them. I heard they now live in a small rented apartment in a neighborhood Patricia used to openly despise. The silence in my life now is peace, not loneliness. I learned that the mistake many men make is believing love is a blank check for abuse. We're taught to provide, to protect, to endure, but no one teaches us that loyalty must be mutual. If respect isn't sitting at the table, then the table is worthless. I don't regret my coldness. In this world, if you are too soft, parasites devour you. If you are too hard, they fear you. I would rather be feared for my intelligence than used for my kindness. My life now is different. I still work, I still build, but my foundations are iron. I no longer allow anyone into my home unless they bring the same level of integrity I offer. Revenge didn't give me back the lost time, but it gave me something far more valuable: control over my own destiny. They thought I was useless because my strength wasn't in shouting, it was in patience. They were wrong. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. It's sitting in silence, pouring yourself a glass of the wine they once coveted, and knowing that everything you have is yours, because no one could take it from you through deception. They have their applause. I have my freedom. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories.